Welcome back to our Bible reading. It is January 28th, and we are so sad that we have to say goodbye to two of our books. We are completing the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 28, and we are completing Acts chapter 28, and we're completing the book of Acts as well. And so we are just glad that you are here to join us as we start new books tomorrow. But remember, regardless if we start a book or end a book, we are all here to do three main things: to read, to glean, and beam for Jesus. Let us begin in our first text in Genesis chapter 28. Now remember, or 29, remember in Genesis chapter 28, which we did yesterday, it was about Jacob getting this confirmation from God and being confirmed that God's gonna bless him and make him a great nation. And so now we see Jacob going to the land of his mother, or where his uncle is, to find him a wife. And the text says that as he goes over there, he sees that there is a well with a rock on it and sheep and animals needing to come and get some food and get some water. And so he asks the group that is coming, why don't you feed them? They say the rock needs to be removed. And so he removes the rock because he is told that this is familiar territory to Laban, who is his uncle, which is why he is there. And then he sees a beautiful woman there, and he is, whoa. You could just see in the actions of what he does, he's just like in shock, because he moves this rock and he feeds the sheep, and then he finds out who this is, and guess what he does? He kisses her. She is completely caught off guard. She doesn't even know his name, and this random guy out of nowhere sees her, falls love struck, and just kisses her. What a gesture. And then afterwards, then he tells her, oh, by the way, I'm Jacob, and I think we're kinsmen, so we should be married. And lo and behold, she's love struck as well. She runs back, tells her father the news, and he's like, yay, he celebrates, he's happy, and so he ends up staying there. But in the process of staying there, he thinks to himself, wait a second, if you want her, should I just give her to you for free? What are you gonna give me? You don't have anything with you. And Jacob says, I will serve you 7 years. And the text says in verse 20, Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. This guy was love struck, but he backed it up by showing it with his actions. What a beautiful testimony to love. What a testimony to being able to do whatever it takes to be with the one that you care for, and that was Jacob. But the sad story is he's deceived. Remember, Jacob in of himself has been a deceiver his whole life. Now the tables have turned, because now Laban deceives him, because after those 7 years, he gives Jacob his oldest daughter, Leah, instead. And when he wakes up in the morning after the consummation of their marriage, he realizes he was deceived. And he goes to Laban and says, Laban, what have you done? Why have you done this? And then Laban's response is simply, this isn't our custom. We never give the younger first. We always give the older first. But if you want Rachel, guess what you got to do? Another 7 years. And guess what Jacob did? Gladly did another 7 years. This man really loved this woman, but I got a feel for Leah, because the text tells us that God opened up her womb and maybe closed Rachel's, and you can see Leah saying, finally, I've gotten a son. Then she got a second son and a third son and then a fourth son. She says, finally, maybe Jacob will love me. Maybe he will appreciate me, but if not, she at least has her boys to care for her boys to love her boys to remind her she's an incredible, beautiful woman and mother. Must be a sad existence for Leah to know that she is not the one who was wanted, that she is the one who is second best, that she is the one who is coming to this man who doesn't really want her. What an existence to have, how sad. But notice, God sees her. God doesn't abandon Leah. He loves her and opens her womb to let her know that she is loved by God, but she is also cherished by giving the blessing of having kids. What a sad ordeal that this situation has arose in this way, but we can still see God showing his care and mercy. And even though Jacob has been a deceiver, he's kind of getting a taste of his own medicine. So not saying that this is warranted or deserved, but this is part of his growing process and learning to see if he's going to stand for God and be this covenant man that he has to be, then he's going to have to go through some things. And some of them are facing his own demons, maybe even getting back what he has done so he could learn and be the leader that God has called him to be. Food for thought. Now we're going to say goodbye to the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, the last chapter, chapter 28. We read that Jesus is inside the tomb, and then an angel of the Lord comes down, breaks open the tomb, the soldiers there are knocked out, and then an angel appears to both Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jesus. And it says that he tells them, go and tell the disciples, we are here. He is raised. He is risen. And as they're going, Jesus appears to them and stops them and greets them and tells them the same. Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and I will see them there. And so they go. But what about these soldiers? What happens to them? Well, they go and they tell the high priest, because the high priests are the ones who wanted them there. Remember, they wanted the soldiers to be there so the disciples don't steal them. But they told them, hey, there was this angel. It's real. He broke them out. The Pharisees and the high priests and religious leaders didn't want to hear it. So what did? They paid them off. They said, here, you're going to tell them a different story. You fell asleep. And the text goes, this story is still told to the Jews that this day that Jesus' body was stolen. He was never resurrected. And finally, the end of chapter 28, the chapter that we love, that we hear all the time, Jesus now appears to them and reminds them all authority is given unto him, and that we are to go and make disciples, teaching and baptizing and doing all these things that we have been taught, and God will be with us forever. Christ had endured everything. He was beaten, he was bruised, he was resurrected. And before that, he taught us, he did miracles, he did healings. Now he's passing the baton to you and to me. How are we going to handle that baton? Are we going to grab it faithfully, wholeheartedly, convictingly, and take it to the next generation? Are we going to take it to our neighbor? Are we going to take it to those who need to hear the message? Because the message as it's closing is like, I am with you, and I have all the authority, and you are now my messenger to go and do likewise. What a beautiful way to end the book of Matthew, the beautiful way to end the gospel. We turn now to our next passage, Esther chapter 5, and this story continues with this whole dread of the Jews being destroyed. Haman had already got the decree. Mordecai had already told Esther, I need you to pray, I need you to pray. And so she fasted and prayed. Mordecai fasted and prayed, and now she's going to go before the king. And so she gets on her royal gown and she goes before the king, and she opens the door, and she could be struck killed by the raising or the lowering of his scepter, and instead he grants her reception. She comes, she touches the scepter, and he says, my queen, I'll give you half of my kingdom. What is it that you want? And you could almost tell with like a sigh of relief, like, oh my gosh, I didn't die. Oh my gosh, he does love me. Or he didn't kill me like he got rid of Vashti. And she just simply requests for a banquet. And so they had a banquet, and she requested Haman to be there. And they were there, and then he asked her again, my queen, what do you want? Half my kingdom is yours for the asking. And then she asked the second time, if it pleases the king, let us meet a second time. And he says, yes, let's meet a second time. By this time, Haman's leaving, and he thinks he's it. He thinks he is top dog, because as he goes, he's being worshipped by the people. They're bowing to him, saying all these respectful terms because of his position and who he is, and it gets so much to his head because Mordecai, again, doesn't bow to him, doesn't acknowledge him, and he goes home and he complains to his wife and his friend, and he says, look, I am second in command. Look, the king invited me, the queen invited me to this banquet. Now she's asking it to me again. I have all this honor, but all of it means nothing. Let's read that verse. Yet, verse 13, yet all this does me no good, so long as I see the Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. How petty, how prideful. You have all this power, you have all this position, you have all this goodness to lead people, to lead a nation, and yet you are focusing on one man. And now you want to kill the whole nation because of one man. And now his wife gives him these words, why don't you build a gallows and hang him? Haman loved to hear that. Let's make a spectacle of this man because he's not respecting me. He's not honoring me. And so he has the gallows built, not knowing that the very banquet that Esther is having is to point out Haman. And the very gallows that he has made are going to be the same gallows that he hangs on. Church, this is a reminder. Do not think highly of yourself. Do not think of yourself greater than you should be. We are to humble ourselves before the Lord. We are to take out the beam from our own eyes before we take the speck out of someone else. And we are to let God do the judging and judgment of others. We are simply called to serve. We are called to proclaim the message. And we are called to be as Esther, to not fight, not to push, but just to serve as God would have us serve. What a beautiful testimony of Esther. What a humble spirit, not to go in there and just attack or to reveal her character, but simply to show the king her love for him and to show her love for God by trying to help her people and say what the truth is. This is how Christ would have us act. This is how Christians ought to act. Whenever you're tempted to take charge or to push, think on the life and example of Esther. I know it's easier for us to always look at the texts and the stories, and there's a lot, David and Samson and all these biblical heroes, but there's some sheroes here, and Esther is a shero. And this is something we should definitely take into account in being humble and serving and allowing God to take care of the results as we speak truth. What a beautiful message of Esther. And now we're going to close the book of Acts, the last chapter of the book of Acts, Acts 28. They landed on an island of Malta. Remember, they were in a storm in chapter 27, and now they finally landed on the seashore, and the island is Malta, and Paul is getting out some wood, and he starts a fire, and a serpent comes out, and it bites him, and the locals say, oh, he must be an evil man. He must be a murderer, because he didn't die in the storm, but the snake has bit him and he's going to kill him, and now justice is served. But all of a sudden, Paul didn't die. They waited a while, nothing happened. And then in their mentality, it switched. Oh my goodness, he must be a god. You see, it's interesting. We're in a culture of how important and big first impressions are, and they are. But notice what Christ himself did. He says, let your character stand before you. Sometimes people will say all sorts of nasty things about you, but continue to walk as a Christian, to continue to endure in the patience of the saints. And when it's all said and done, people will look back and see the truth. This is just a small snippet of how we are to combat the culture of first impressions or trying to satisfy people with their wants and their needs that go against what God is. We are to stand in faith. We are to show Christ and Christ alone. And Paul never argued or even tried to withstand. He simply was a light. He simply cared for those men who were on that ship, even if they wanted to kill him. And he came to this island, and once he was cured, then he started to cure others. And then everyone started bringing their sick and others to him, and he cured them all. We are to continually walk in light despite the pressure, because now after he went to this island, and 3 months later they finally got on a ship, and then they finally eventually reached Rome. Paul was in Rome, and he tried to meet with the Jews, and he said, brothers, let's figure this out. And he starts to talk to all the leaders of the Jews in Rome, because they don't know anything that Paul's been saying, but they don't hear anything good about this sect, the people of the way, or Christians. And so he goes through the book of the law, through Moses, through the Old Testament, and he shares with them everything all day. And at the end of it, the text says some were convinced, some weren't. And notice what Paul, his word, says in verse 26. He says, the prophet Isaiah was correct when it says this: go to this people and say, you will indeed listen but never understand. You will indeed look but never perceive. For this people's hearts have grown dull, and their ears are hard of hearing, and they have shut their eyes, so that they may not look with their eyes and listen with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn, and I would heal them. He is saying to them, look, God's been trying to reach you for all these centuries. You guys don't get it. The message is now going to go to the Gentiles. And they grumbled even further and further. You see, Paul just did his job. Paul was a messenger. And you and I must be messengers, not just of word, but also be the messenger in deed. And this is an example for us. Whatever you may be going through right now, whether you may be dragged through the mud, or maybe you may be enduring something difficult, just stand for the truth. Just continually do what is right. And when it's all said and done, with Esther, you will overcome. With Paul, when he was there with the snakes, let people perceive you a certain way, but keep being faithful, and it will change in their minds. Jesus himself was dead in the grave, but he rose again, and he focused on that. We also see with Jacob, he made many mistakes. But once God came to him, he strived to do the right thing. And he was even a victim of his own actions, which probably helped him to learn not to do that ever again and deceive people. And so, church, the message is clear. Let's be faithful. Let's be true in what we do, and let God take care of the results. We are here to read, to glean, and beam for Jesus. God bless you.